As far as package shipping simulators go, Deliver at All Costs more closely resembles drunk driving than it does Death Stranding. There's no need for complicated weight management or careful navigation through its 1950s small-town USA setting. Instead, this kooky courier quest loads your pickup truck with increasingly quirky cargo and sends you careening through road signs, fences, shop fronts, and countless pedestrians, with almost every dispatch delivery quickly devolving into a full-on destruction derby. It's a riotously good time for a while, but it soon starts to sputter out and eventually breaks down well before it reaches the end of its 10-hour journey, when its nonsensical sci-fi story fails to pay off and this world turns out to be far more rewarding to reduce to rubble than it is to actually explore. There is a plot connecting all of its street-shredding shipments, but honestly the less said about it the better. You're Winston Green, a likeable fresh hire at the We Deliver Corporation, who's seemingly on the run after a mysterious incident in his past.
Yep, honeymoon's definitely over.
Though it begins as a sort of goofy workplace comedy, it soon makes jarring tonal shifts into corporate crime conspiracies, and eventually a preposterous tale of time travel, before crash landing into a fast-track climax that left me feeling about as hollow as someone who's tried to make a meal out of packing peanuts.
Dang, would you look at that I mean, not actual
Deliver at All Costs' story is a bit like a box of flat-packed furniture delivered from IKEA. It's full of interesting parts to pore over, but once you put it all together it seems noticeably wonkier than you expected, and it's clear that there's more than a couple of screws loose.
Yeah, that's one fine-looking barbecue pit. Why doesn't mine look like that? Ah!
The real star is the staggering destructibility of its world, which is viewed from your choice of two top-down angles. Pretty much everything above ground can be satisfyingly smashed asunder as you tear around in your delivery truck, turning every apartment block into a potential Jenga tower. There's admittedly an overly fragile and weightless feel to it all. It's a bit like crashing through houses made of cards rather than bricks and mortar, but punching my own shortcuts through everything from hotel lobbies to tennis courts and tombstone-covered graveyards kept me consistently amused for at least the first half of the drive. I gleefully sped around chewing through scenery like I was Nicolas Cage in Face Off. Pretty much the only time I pumped the brakes was when I had to keep something from spilling out of my truck bed, or whenever I hit one of the abrupt loading screens that separates each district of the 3 cities that make up its decently sized open world map. Deliver at All Costs' 20-mission long chain of violent cargo hauls aren't so much door-to-door as they are wall-through-wall, but that's not to say I didn't face some resistance along the way. Different challenges are introduced in keeping with the object that's dumped into the back of your truck or dragged behind you with a winch, and a few entertainingly wacky work orders had me laughing out loud.
Hey, he's stealing the parcel!
In one mission reminiscent of Pixar's Up, I was hired to transport a bouquet of helium balloons, which meant that even the smallest bump in the road launched me into a clumsy aerial drift that left me struggling to stay on terra firma like a mailman on the moon's surface. In another, I had to steer around a leaking tank of napalm that was igniting a growing wall of fire behind me, turning a simple pick-up and drop-off into a citywide game of Snake that blew me to smithereens if I attempted to double back on my delivery route. Then there was the time I had to drag a new statue of the local mayor towards the town square without it getting bombed by the swooping seagulls dropping their own special deliveries. Unfortunately though, there are almost as many duds in the mix as there are standouts. Being asked to drive recklessly to scare a limousine full of crooked executives doesn't really come as a break from the norm when you've been otherwise hurtling around like a madman during each and every other job, for example.
Who is this lunatic that's driving us?
A mission to photograph a series of cows being abducted by a UFO can be passed simply by mindlessly spamming the camera button.
Yes, that's a good one.
Meanwhile, the on-foot retrieval of your stolen truck from under the nose of a patrolling security van becomes less of a daring infiltration into a scrapyard and more of a walk in the park, because Deliver at All Costs' stealth system is non-existent, to the point where you can just stroll in there unopposed with minimal thought or effort. That's not to say the rest of the on-foot action is much better.
Bingo!
Pretty much whenever you're forced to leave your car for more than a moment, it becomes a dull stretch of basic platforming, where your only actions are walk, jump, climb, and shove.
Oof.
Elsewhere in Deliver at All Costs, there's rarely any substantial consequences for your actions, and that makes it start to get dull sooner than it seems like it should. If you accidentally flip your car over, it will automatically right itself. If you bust a tire, you can hop out and instantly repair it with the tap of a button. If you bring down an entire building because you're doing donuts through all four corners of its foundations, you will almost certainly draw the attention of the police, but you can instantly lose that heat by leaving your truck and diving into a dumpster, even without necessarily breaking the line of sight.
Lost him! Stay alert!
In fact, even if you're caught, you just instantly respawn with no punishment served anyway.
Your number's up!
Note to self, attend driver lessons.
On the one hand, the general lack of rules or repercussions gave me the freedom to drive as recklessly as I wanted to.
Oh, yikes.
But it also meant that almost everything felt noticeably low in stakes. Sometimes, in fact, Deliver at All Costs is so forgiving that it completely sucks any tension out of the task at hand. Steering your delivery truck from one side of the city to the other with an armed atom bomb couched in its cargo bed shouldn't just have you flirting with danger, but buying danger a drink, beckoning danger onto the dance floor, and giving danger an open-mouthed kiss. But in practice, it's surprisingly lacking in intensity. There's no ticking clock to pressure you into keeping your foot clamped down on the accelerator, allowing you to take things as slow and steady as you like. That means the only challenge here is to not drive like a maniac. Even when I did accidentally bump into a car and blow myself to bits, generous checkpoints meant that I was back on the road with my unstable payload with minimum penalty to my progress. I don't want a game to be overly punishing, but there's a happy medium to be struck that this one never manages to nail.
Oh, you made it. Well done. You weren't in any real danger, of course.
Despite the consistently impressive amount of environmental detail to be found throughout its Toy Town world,
Wow.
there's not a great deal of interesting activities to amuse yourself with when you're off the clock.
What a view.
There are a further 10 side missions to be found dotted around the map, but few of them are particularly memorable. There's a basic circuit race to place first in and a couple of missing persons to track down,
Would you mind taking a spin around the edges of the city to find him?
but there's little here to match the more creative courier tasks found in the main story path. Well, there is one enjoyable exception that had me piloting a satanic sports car straight out of Stephen King's Christine.
It moves on its own.
Deliver at All Costs could have used a lot more like her to make its map call me back for more. There are other unique vehicles to track down too, but these are uniformly disappointing on a number of counts. For one, their locations are clearly marked on the map from the outset, so you're not provided with the same thrill of discovery of, say, a Forza Horizon barn find. You also don't have a garage to store them in, and nor can you use them for a delivery mission. So they're mainly there for a brief joyride before being ditched in favour of a return to your trusty We Deliver truck. Worse still, they don't provide any real point of difference to make them even remotely worth the minimal effort to uncover. They each handle more or less the same, and there are no unique emergency missions to undertake in the ambulance, or dessert drops in the ice cream van to trigger like you might find in a Grand Theft Auto game. They're just sort of there. Another underwhelming factor is the upgrades you can weld onto your truck using spare parts found throughout the world. As ridiculous as it may be to open a giant chest to find someone has stashed a single roll of duct tape in it.
Oh, this should come in handy.
They seem like they should open up new possibilities for mayhem and creativity in a world that's as eager to be knocked down as this, but these two are disappointingly limited in their use. The crane is handy for the job that sees you load a giant marlin onto your truck and then literally fishtail your way to a drop-off point.
Watch it, psycho!
But both it and the winch you get access to afterwards can't actually be used outside of a mission to mess with objects at will. You can't, say, attach the winch's tow cable to a random car or pedestrian and drag them around town just for kicks like you can in Saints Row or Just Cause. You can supercharge your car horn to blast the windows out of shop fronts, but you can't use the cargo bed catapult at all outside of a handful of specific story moments. There's a lot of potential for Deliver at All Costs to achieve the same sort of freeform fun that we see in games like Goat Simulator, but it just doesn't give you enough flexibility to really revel in it after you've grown tired of blasting into people's living rooms like a Kool-Aid man on wheels.
Wow, from the other side, that's kind of annoying.
In its best moments, Deliver at All Costs is as entertaining as it is uneven. For every truly creative cargo haul twist, there's another that's uninspired or lacking in intensity and urgency, and although there's certainly fun to be had crashing through its many structures like a bully through a sandcastle, the novelty wears off long before it ends, and all you're left with is an impressively realised 1950s world with depressingly little else to do in it. Throw in a silly slapdash story and some toys for your truck you're largely forbidden from playing with, and Deliver at All Costs is one shipment that's far from the complete package.
Executive Reviews editor Tom Marks here with Tristan Ogilvie to talk about his review of Deliver at All Costs. Tristan has been around, I'm sorry to make you feel old, been reviewing at IGN for more than a decade. I'm sure you've seen his work. If you haven't or aren't familiar, you are a reviewer on most of the Yakuza games, you're a reviewer on most of the Sniper Elite games, most recently you reviewed Atomfall. You've also are a dedicated delivery man reviewer because you reviewed Death Stranding for us, so this isn't your first. But I wanted to ask you specifically about this one. Why'd you want to review Deliver at All Costs? What drew you to this game?
So I think you're sort of underselling my resume of delivery game reviews. Not only did I review Death Stranding, but also Totally Reliable Delivery Simulator. And
right.
Not one, but two moving out games, which are sort of tangentially delivery games. You're still unloading and loading trucks. So at this point, we've put you in a hole, I guess. It's my thing now. I'm the delivery guy. I'm the delivery game expert, or the Fed expert, might I say. Sorry about that, viewers. So it felt natural for me to put my hand up for Deliver at All Costs, but the real sweetener was the destructibility of the environments, and I think anyone looking at this game will be drawn to it for that as a hook, because it is kind of the fundamental hook of the game. I love destruction in games. 20 plus years ago when I was playing Red Faction on PS2 with the geomod technology, I was like, this is it. This is the future. Hasn't really panned out that way. There hasn't been that many games over the past 20 years with just sort of destructible environments. So anytime I see one to this extent, I naturally get excited to jump into it.
Whoops! Oh, come on. Mr. Palmer left the car in reverse.
So let's talk about that then, because, the destructibility, I think you're totally right. That's what catches the eye when you watch gameplay of this. What do you think makes good destructibility? You already called out Red Faction Guerrilla. There's more recently Teardown kind of tore up the world with how destructible it was. Do you like that? Is that where you gravitate towards, of everything is a voxel and can be destroyed, or do you like some limitations on it? Is there an in between? Is there a too much? Where do you fall in all that?
I just love destruction, fundamentally. I mean, I'm someone who will lose a game of Jenga on purpose just to watch the tower fall down. In fact, one of the happiest days of my life was when a mate of mine was remodeling his kitchen, and he invited me over to help him smash the old kitchen to bits with a sledgehammer. I should point out that I like sanctioned vandalism. I don't have a criminal record or anything like that. So just destruction is fun, and in the case of Deliver at All Costs, it's really impressive, like how everything can be kind of reduced to rubble in the kind of physics of it, and how it all falls apart and all that kind of stuff. I think that only goes so far, the sort of, it's kind of shallow after a while, because there's no real sort of gameplay benefit to destroying things. It's just, they're just there to be destroyed. Whereas something like you mentioned, like Teardown, you're actually using the destruction of the environment to your benefit, creating different entry points for a heist or whatever it may be. In Red Faction games too, you're sort of tunneling around and all that kind of stuff to approach levels from a different angle. So I think destruction for me is always welcome, but I want it to have a kind of tangible sort of gameplay, benefit to make it sort of go the distance.
Let's talk about that exact point, though, that you just brought up, right, of this idea of, fun while it lasts, it runs its course a little quickly, right?
Yes.
There's this interesting question, for me as a reviewer at least, of a game overstaying its welcome and maybe doing one thing that is fun like this, but just going on too long, not really coming up with enough to do with that thing. In your eyes, or for you personally, do you think that, I guess the simplest way to ask it, do you think that this would have been a better game, quote unquote, if it was half as long, right? Or is more of something that just isn't really used in interesting ways still better than less of a thing that does work?
It's a great question. This is, at the end of the day, it's only a 10-hour game, which for me is kind of a sweet spot. I love that kind of length. Yeah. But in this instance, maybe it would have been a better game if they had trimmed a lot of those missions that were a bit weaker, because it starts in a great fashion, like you're sort of transporting fireworks that are like shooting out of the back of your truck and landing on the ground in front of you. You got to sort of swerve to avoid them, or you're transporting a giant marlin that's like alive and like flipping around the back of your truck, so it's like causing you to swerve into the scenery. But then there's just a few too many missions introduced that just feel like a lot of other sandbox games. I think I mentioned in the review where you sort of have to drive in a reckless fashion to scare people that are in the limousine that you're driving. I feel like I've done that in at least every GTA game since GTA 3, or maybe even before that. There's a lot of stuff like that that's just not as unique to this game or as fresh as the other missions. So I think this game could have trimmed a bit of that fat. So, but 10 hours, it wasn't long enough to get, I wasn't exhausted by the end of it. Like, there was still glimmers of fun along the way, but yeah, it could have been sort of contracted a bit more to make it sort of have a bit more of a positive impact.
Done and dusted.
A last question to spring on you here. This game didn't quite work for you, had this appeal. Is there a game that you might recommend in its place to someone who is looking forward to this one, where you might say, if you were looking forward to that Destruction, maybe try this out instead?
I would definitely say Teardown, not to harp on about that game, but
it's a good game.
It's a great game with incredible destruction, and it just uses that destruction in more interesting ways, more challenging ways, and it's I think about 40 missions long or something like that. It's a nice chunky thing. It never gets old.
And it's got driving through walls as well. So
it accommodates all your destruction needs, Tom. So it's a great recommendation. If you're just if the destruction element isn't the thing that necessarily appeals to you about Deliver at All Costs, there's also recently The Precinct, which is kind of a similar kind of top-down, city-wide sandbox game. In that instance, you're a policeman, which doesn't appeal to me because I don't want to be writing parking tickets. I want to be blowing cars up. But there's plenty of action in that still, so that could maybe scratch the itch, especially in this newly GTA 6-less year that we now find ourselves in. If you want that kind of classic GTA kind of experience in not nearly as an ambitious package, then The Precinct could be another option for sure.
I think if we're holding games to ambition of games to the bar of GTA, we're not going to hit that very often. So, well, Tristan, thank you very much for chatting with me about Deliver at All Costs, going into your tastes a little bit more. If you want more from Tristan, check out his review of Atomfall from the end of March. And then, like you said, we also do have that review of The Precinct that you can check out as well. And for everything else, stick with IGN.